My own brother slept with my wife, and now my son might be his. But the worst part? I had no idea. Some wounds never heal. No matter how much time passes, the scars remain, raw, unforgotten. I once believed that nothing could be worse than being cast aside by my own family. I was wrong. The cruelest betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the people who should have loved you the most. Looking back, I wonder if the signs were always there. If I had just opened my eyes sooner, would I have seen the inevitable disaster creeping toward me? Maybe, maybe not. But one thing is certain. What happened next changed me forever. From the moment we were born, my younger brother, Ryan, was treated like he was made of gold. Our mother, Margaret, worshipped him. She cooked for him, did his laundry, excused every mistake. He was her perfect little prince. Meanwhile, Ethan, the eldest, was little more than an afterthought. If Ryan needed help with his homework, I had to tutor him. If he made a mess, I was the one told to clean it up. If he took something that was mine, I was expected to share. "You're the older brother," my mother would say. "You have to sacrifice for him." It wasn't just favoritism. It was neglect. Ryan was given love without limits, while I was barely acknowledged unless there was something I could do for him. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need validation. But deep down, I knew I was nothing to them. And Ryan, he knew it too. Ryan wasn't just spoiled. He was cruel. At first, it was small things, tearing pages out of my textbooks just to watch my frustration, sneaking into my room, reading my private journals, then twisting my words to turn my own mother against me. He stole my allowance, knowing that if I dared to accuse him, he'd just cry and act innocent. But it didn't stop there. One morning, I poured myself a bowl of cereal. As I raised the spoon to my mouth, I noticed something. Tiny stones mixed in with the milk. I barely avoided cracking a tooth. When I confronted Ryan, he only grinned. "It was just a joke," he said. My mother laughed it off, saying, "That's how brothers bond." That was the moment I started to understand the truth. No one cared. At school, it was worse. I was already an easy target for bullies. Glasses, quiet, always buried in books. Ryan could have defended me. He could have at least ignored it. Instead, he encouraged them. He laughed as they shoved me into lockers, called me names. Loser, worthless, waste of space. But there was one day, one moment, I will never forget. Ryan and I had been arguing over something I don't even remember now. His face twisted with hatred as he spat the words that would stay with me forever. "Why don't you just kill yourself?" I didn't reply. I couldn't. I just stared at him, my mind numb. He knew I was struggling. He knew I wasn't okay. And he still said it. I wanted to believe he didn't mean it, that he was just being cruel in the heat of the moment. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw it. He meant every single word. That was the moment I stopped hoping he would ever change. Then came the night Ryan almost took things too far. I was sitting at my desk, reading, when I felt something warm near the back of my head. Then, the sharp scent of burning hair. I jerked away, slapping at the back of my scalp, and spun around to see Ryan standing behind me, a lighter in his hand. He was laughing. My hands trembled as I touched my hair, feeling the scorched strands between my fingers. My heart pounded against my ribs. "Relax," Ryan smirked. "I wasn't really going to burn you. I just wanted to see what would happen." I saw red. I stormed past him, straight to my mother. This time, she would listen. This time, she would stop him. She didn't. "He was just playing. Ethan," she sighed, barely looking up from her magazine. "You always overreact." I felt something snap inside me, but before I could say another word, another voice cut through the room. "What the hell did you just say?" My father, Richard, had been standing in the doorway. And for the first time in my life, I saw something in his face that I had never seen before. Rage. Ryan stopped laughing. "You think setting someone on fire is a joke?" my father demanded. His voice was cold, sharp as a blade. Ryan's mouth opened, then closed. He had never been held accountable before. He didn't know what to say. "If you ever, and I mean ever, do something like that again, I'll call the police myself." For the first time in his life, Ryan looked afraid. That night, my father came into my room. He sat on the edge of my bed, rubbing a hand over his face. I had never expected him to take my side. I should have stepped in sooner, he admitted. I wanted to believe Ryan would grow out of it, but I was wrong. I didn't know what to say. I've let you fend for yourself too long, son. He looked me in the eye. That changes now. The next day, he signed me up for MMA training. At first, I felt ridiculous. Me? Learning how to fight? I had spent my whole life avoiding conflict, but as the weeks passed, something inside me began to change. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel weak. For the first time in my life, I had control. And Ryan had no idea. It was bound to happen. For years, I had endured. For years, I had kept my head down, taken every insult, every humiliation, every act of cruelty. But that day, that was the day everything changed, and Ryan never saw it coming. It started like any other day. I was in my room, flipping through a textbook, when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of drawers being opened. My body tensed. I turned, and there he was. Ryan. His back was to me, rummaging through my desk like he owned the place. His fingers closed around a wad of bills, money I had saved from weeks of chores. He didn't even flinch when I spoke. Put it back. Ryan turned, grinning like the cocky bastard he was. He held up the money and waved it in my face. What? You gonna cry about it? Or are you gonna run to Daddy? I took a step forward. My heart pounded. My hands curled into fists at my sides. The old Ethan, the one who would have clenched his jaw and let it go, was gone. I wasn't that boy anymore. Ryan laughed. Face it, loser. You'll never... I punched him. The impact was instant. Ryan's head snapped to the side and he stumbled back, crashing against my desk. Blood dripped from his nose, his eyes wide with pure, stunned disbelief. For the first time in his life, Ryan looked afraid of me. And it felt good. He barely had time to react before I grabbed the money from his hand, shoving him back down. His legs gave out, and he hit the floor, hands clutching his face. Then, he started crying. It was surreal. This was Ryan, the same Ryan who had tormented me for years, who had laughed when I was beaten down, who had told me to kill myself. And now, here he was, on the ground, sobbing like a helpless child. But the moment didn't last. Footsteps pounded down the hallway, and then our mother burst in. Margaret took one look at Ryan, on the floor, bloody-nosed and crying, then at me, standing over him, fists clenched. And of course, she reacted exactly as I expected. "Ethan!" she shrieked, rushing to Ryan's side. "What did you do?" I scoffed, wiping my hand on my jeans. "He stole my money." But Margaret wasn't listening. She cradled Ryan's face, checking for injuries like he was some fragile little thing. "My baby," she gasped. "Are you okay?" Ryan sniffled and milked it for all it was worth. I knew exactly what was coming next. "You should be ashamed of yourself," Margaret snapped, finally turning to me, fury in her eyes. "He's your little brother. You're supposed to protect him, not attack him like some savage." I felt my jaw tighten. "He's not a kid, Mom. He's a thief." That was when another voice cut through the chaos. What the hell is going on? Our father. Richard stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes scanning the scene. Ryan immediately dropped the act. He wiped his tears, sat up straighter, trying to salvage what was left of his dignity. But it was too late. "Ethan hit your brother," Margaret exclaimed, as if that single fact erased everything else. Richard's gaze flickered to me. I met his eyes, not backing down. "Ryan stole from me," I said evenly. "I took back what was mine." Ryan's head shot up. I was just borrowing it. Richard exhaled slowly, his jaw clenching. Then, in a calm but undeniably sharp voice, he said, "You're lucky all you got was a punch. Ryan." The room went silent. "If you pulled that stunt with anyone else, they'd call the cops." Ryan paled. Margaret gaped at Richard, horrified. "Are you seriously taking Ethan's side?" Richard's expression didn't change. "I'm saying he was right to stand up for himself. Something you should have taught him a long time ago." Ryan's face twisted. his fingers clenched into fists at his sides. His lips trembled, not with fear, but with rage. That was the moment I saw it. The first spark of true hatred in his eyes. Because for the first time ever, Ryan wasn't the one being protected. After that day, things were different. Ryan still ran his mouth when no one else was around, still threw insults under his breath, still acted like the same arrogant little bastard he always was. But something had shifted. He avoided me more. He no longer shoved past me in the hallway, no longer sneered in my face like he was untouchable. Because he knew the truth now. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. And Ryan? He couldn't stand it. I saw it in the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The quiet resentment, the cold calculation. The thing about Ryan was, he never accepted defeat. He never forgave. Never forgot. And that day, in that moment, he made a silent vow. He would get back at me. One day, some way. I just didn't know when. I didn't know that this tiny shift in power would set into motion a chain of events that would completely destroy my life. That the hatred burning behind Ryan's eyes would fester, grow, and eventually lead to a betrayal so vile, so unforgivable, that it would cost me everything. Because Ryan wasn't finished. Not even close. Freedom never tasted so sweet. For years, I had lived under my mother's cold indifference and Ryan's cruel shadow. But now, as I stepped onto the campus of my dream university, all of that felt like a distant nightmare. No more stolen money, no more shredded books, no more waking up to find my personal things destroyed for Ryan's amusement. For the first time in my life, I was free. College felt like a fresh start. I poured myself into my studies, surrounded myself with new people, and finally got to experience a life where I wasn't just Ryan's older brother. I could just be Ethan. And God, it felt good. I made friends, found confidence I never had before, and for the first time, I was happy. Really, truly happy. But the thing about happiness? It makes you lower your guard. I didn't know it yet, but Ryan hadn't forgotten. He hadn't moved on. I had embarrassed him. I had stripped away the power he had over me. And Ryan never forgave. I met Karen at a party during my second year. She was beautiful, magnetic, effortlessly charming. The kind of woman who could walk into a room and command attention without even trying. She found me before I even noticed her. "Ethan, right?" she had said, flashing a dazzling smile. "You helped my friend Mia with her project last semester." I barely remembered, but Karen did. She remembered everything. And just like that, I was hooked. She was unlike anyone I had ever met. Warm, supportive, genuinely interested in me. For the first time, someone looked at me like I mattered, like I was special. I fell hard. And Karen? She made sure I did. We were inseparable. Everything just clicked. Karen made me laugh. She listened when I spoke. She didn't treat me like I was invisible. She was the first person to make me feel like I belonged. Within months, we were talking about a future together, a life. And I believed every word of it. Because why wouldn't I? Karen was perfect, almost too perfect. Looking back, there were signs, subtle, easy to miss. The way she would sometimes ask too many questions about my family. The way she would casually bring up Ryan, always with innocent curiosity. The way she once said, almost in passing, "Your brother must be interesting. I'd love to meet him someday." But I ignored them. Because I was in love. And love makes you blind. By our final year, Karen was pregnant. I was stunned, terrified. But I loved her, and I wanted to do the right thing. So I proposed. We got married in a small, intimate ceremony. My father, Richard, was proud, shaking my hand and telling me I was going to be a great husband and father. Even my mother, Margaret, seemed pleased. But Ryan was smiling. For the first time in years, he smiled at me, a slow, knowing smile that sent a cold shiver down my spine. I should have seen it then. The warning, the silent message hidden behind that smirk. But I didn't, because I was happy. And Ryan knew exactly when to strike. It started small. Karen would be distracted, lost in thought. She'd be texting late at night, quickly locking her phone when I walked into the room. At first I told myself it was nothing, just hormones, stress. the weight of a baby on the way. Then came the excuses. I have to work late. I'm meeting a friend. It's just a business trip. All normal, all plausible. But then there were the times I woke up to find her out of bed, whispering on the phone, the way she suddenly seemed hesitant to talk about my family. And most of all, the way she avoided saying Ryan's name. She never mentioned him, never asked about him, never brought up the wedding day where she had met him for the first time. Like she was afraid I'd see something. Something she was hiding, but I was too far gone. I trusted her. I loved her. I never once imagined that the person I had given my heart to, the mother of my child, was already breaking me from the inside out. 3 months ago, my world ended. I just didn't know it yet. Karen stood in front of me, pale as a ghost, her hands trembling. Ethan, there's something you need to know. I lowered my coffee mug, sensing the weight in her voice. A sinking feeling settled in my gut. Henry, she swallowed, unable to meet my eyes. He might not be yours. Time froze. The words hung in the air, a blade suspended above my head, waiting to drop. I felt my pulse in my throat, in my ears, deafening, relentless. What? My voice didn't even sound like my own. Karen's lips trembled. Her fingers clutched at her sleeves, twisting them as if she could strangle the guilt out of herself. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor. Who? My voice was low, steady, but inside, something was cracking, splitting apart at the seams. Karen's eyes darted to the floor. She opened her mouth, then hesitated, like she already knew that once she said it, there would be no undoing it. Then, in a whisper, she breathed the name that stole the air from my lungs. Ryan. Number. It wasn't possible. Say it again, I demanded, stepping forward. Say his name again. Karen flinched. It was Ryan, she repeated, voice barely above a breath. She kept talking, but I couldn't hear her anymore. Everything blurred, like the world was tilting on its axis. The walls, the floor, the air, it all closed in on me. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. No. The word came out hoarse, disbelieving. Not Ryan. Anyone but him. Karen's silence was confirmation enough. I stared at her, willing this to be some sick misunderstanding, a cruel joke, anything but the truth. Tell me everything, I finally said, my voice like steel. Now. Karen exhaled shakily. And then? She confessed it all. She told me how it started, how from the moment she met Ryan, he had worked his way into her head. He made me question everything, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. He said you weren't enough for me, that you were weak, that I deserved more. My stomach twisted violently. And you believed him? She squeezed her eyes shut. I didn't mean for it to happen, Ethan, she choked out. I swear I didn't. But she did. She let it happen. Again and again. Karen admitted that their affair began before we were even married. That the night she left my parents' house early on New Year's Eve, the night she claimed she wasn't feeling well, she had gone straight to him. That was the first time, she said, wiping her tears. The first time, but not the last. Even after we married, she kept seeing him. While I was working late, she was with Ryan. While I was making plans for our future, she was sneaking off to hotels. While I was raising a son I thought was mine, she was lying to my face. I felt sick. How long? I asked. Karen hesitated. Ethan. How long? Karen? I barked. She inhaled sharply, her shoulders shaking. It never really stopped. A ringing filled my ears. All those times she had seemed distracted. The late-night texts, the sudden business trips. I had been too blind, too trusting, too stupid. And Henry, I forced out, my voice barely above a whisper. Did you ever even wonder? She nodded slowly. I knew there was a chance. She knew, and she let me believe he was mine anyway. The betrayal was suffocating. Karen was sobbing now, her face buried in her hands. I never wanted to hurt you, Ethan. I swear Shut up, she froze. I didn't yell. I didn't slam my fists on the table. But my voice, it was ice. Karen lifted her head slowly, staring at me like she was finally seeing something she had never seen before. Something cold. Something dead inside. You don't get to cry, I said. I turned, walked to the closet, and pulled out a suitcase. Karen's breath hitched. What are you doing? Packing. She bolted forward, grabbing my arm. No, you can't just leave. I yanked away from her grasp. Watch me, she panicked. Ethan, please, what? I snapped. Forgive you? Pretend this never happened? Keep playing happy family while you fuck my brother behind my back? She sobbed harder. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. Fix this? I let out a cold, humorless laugh. Karen, this isn't a mistake. This is a fucking betrayal. She crumbled to the floor, clinging to my legs. I love you, Ethan. I swear. I do. I stared down at her, and for the first time in my life, I felt nothing. No, you don't, I said. I zipped up the suitcase, grabbed my keys, and headed for the door. Karen scrambled to her feet, running after me. You can't do this, she screamed. Henry needs you. I stopped. Slowly, I turned back. For a moment, just a moment. I let my eyes settle on the framed pictures on the wall, the ones of me, Karen, and Henry. The ones that were nothing but a lie. Henry's not my son, I said. Then I walked out. And I never looked back. I could have walked away. I could have let the past die. Let Ryan rot in whatever miserable hole he'd dug for himself. But some betrayals demand justice. And I wasn't going to let him escape this one. After leaving Karen, I drove straight to my parents' house. My hands were steady on the wheel. My heart was not. I had no idea how this would go. Would my mother believe me? Would my father finally see Ryan for what he was? I didn't care. They were going to hear it anyway. When I walked in, Margaret was in the kitchen, humming softly as she set the table for dinner. My father, Richard, sat in his armchair reading the paper. They looked up at me, surprised. Ethan, my mother said, blinking. What are you doing here, sweetheart? I dropped my bag by the door. I need to tell you something, I said. Something about Ryan. Her expression softened instantly. Oh, Ethan, you two need to stop fighting. He's still your brother. He slept with Karen. Silence. Dead, suffocating silence. My mother's mouth opened, closed. Then, finally, a weak laugh. That's ridiculous. Ryan wouldn't... He did, I cut in, my voice like stone. For years, behind my back, he got her pregnant. Henry isn't mine. Her face crumpled. No, she whispered. No, there has to be some mistake. There's no mistake, I snapped. Your golden boy stole my wife. He stole my family. And you let him get away with everything his whole damn life, so why would he stop now? My father stood, his face unreadable. Ethan, he said carefully, are you sure about this? I pulled out my phone, opened my call log, and scrolled to Karen's number. Let's find out, I said. Then, in front of both of them, I called Ryan. Ryan picked up on the third ring. Ethan, what the hell do you... Karen told me everything, I said, cutting him off. You still want to lie to me? Silence, then a sharp breath. Look, man, it's not like that. Not like what? Ryan? I asked, keeping my tone even. Not like you spent years screwing my wife behind my back? Not like Henry is your son, not mine? I could hear the wheels turning in his head, the way he hesitated, trying to find the right words to talk his way out of this. She wanted it too, he finally said. I didn't force her. My mother gasped, slapping a hand over her mouth. Richard's face darkened, jaw tightening. You son of a bitch, I said, gripping the phone tighter. You really think that justifies what you did? Ryan scoffed. Don't act like a victim, Ethan. You were never enough for her. You were weak. Pathetic. Women don't want that. They want a real man. Richard grabbed the phone out of my hand. Ryan, he said, voice cold. Silence. Then, cautiously, Dad? You're not my son, Richard said. Not anymore. Then he hung up. Ryan called back instantly. Richard didn't answer. Neither did Margaret. For the first time in his life, Ryan was facing consequences. My father took swift action. First, he called the university and cut off Ryan's tuition payments. Then, he called the bank and froze every account that had Ryan's name on it. Finally, he turned to my mother. "If you want to keep defending him, Margaret, pack your bags and go with him." Margaret was shaking, her hands clutching at her chest. "Richard, please. Choose," he said simply. Tears welled in her eyes. She looked at me, then back at Richard. Then she slumped into a chair and said nothing. Ryan was on his own. Months passed. I built a new life for myself. New apartment, new routine, new future. I should have felt satisfied, knowing Ryan was suffering. But something still burned in my chest, something unsettled. I wanted to see him broken. I wanted him to understand the weight of what he'd done. And then, one night, he called. I almost didn't pick up. But curiosity won out. "Ethan," his voice was hoarse, almost desperate. "I need help." I leaned back in my chair, smirking. "Help? I have nothing, man," he continued. "Dad cut me off. I had to drop out of school. And Karen, she's demanding child support. I can't even afford rent." I chuckled. "Sounds rough." "Come on, man," he pleaded. "You're my brother." I let that hang in the air. Then I said, "You remember when we were kids, Ryan? When you told me I was worthless? When you laughed while I got bullied? When you stole from me, tore my things apart and told me I should kill myself?" He was silent. "How does it feel, little brother?" I said, my voice icy. "To be the one left with nothing?" Ryan's breath hitched. I could tell he wanted to scream, to lash out, to insult me like he always had, but he couldn't. Not anymore. Because for the first time in his life, he was powerless. "Go to hell. Ethan," he spat before hanging up. I put the phone down, staring at it for a long moment. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt like I'd won, but deep inside I knew. This wasn't over. Not yet. It ended the only way it could. Ryan had spent his entire life taking from me, my dignity, my childhood, my peace. Then, when that wasn't enough, he stole my wife, my son, my future. But in the end, the only thing left for him was ruin, and this time, there was no way out. 2 weeks after Ryan's desperate call, my father made an announcement. Over dinner, Richard placed a thick envelope on the table and looked me straight in the eye. "I changed my will," he said. "Everything goes to you, Ethan." Margaret gasped. "Richard, you can't." "I can." And I did. Ryan would inherit exactly $1, a final insult, a legal slap in the face. I thought about Ryan's smug smile all those years ago, how untouchable he believed he was. He had lived his whole life getting away with everything. Not this time. When Ryan found out, he lost it. Neighbors said he trashed his apartment, smashed furniture, threw dishes against the walls, screaming like a rabid animal. He begged. He threatened. He called every relative he could think of, hoping someone, anyone, would take his side. No one did. For the first time in his life, Ryan was truly alone. But Ryan wasn't the type to accept defeat. So he turned to the one person who had always saved him before. Margaret. Late one night, Richard caught her on the phone, whispering in the kitchen. "You have to talk to him," she pleaded. "He's still our son. We can't just abandon him." "We." Richard's voice was sharp. "No, Margaret. You can't let go of him, but I already have." She flinched, clutching the phone tighter. "Please, Richard, he's struggling." "He made his choice," my father said coldly. "And now, so will you." Margaret's breath hitched. "If you want to keep helping him, pack your things and go." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. She looked between me and Richard, her face pale, her hands trembling. For the first time, she realized she was about to lose everything. She put the phone down. Ryan never called her again. With no money, no support, and nowhere to go, Ryan finally hit rock bottom. He dropped out of college, found a job at an auto repair shop, barely scraping by, and in a pathetic twist of fate, he ended up moving in with Karen. They were stuck with each other now. Two people bound by betrayal, forced to live with the wreckage they created. Henry was growing up, a child born from deception, raised by a father who had never planned to be one. Ryan wasn't the king of anything anymore. He was just another nobody. A man who had once laughed as he crushed others beneath his feet. now forced to crawl through the dirt himself. Fitting, wasn't it? As for me, I never looked back. I built a career, climbed higher, worked harder, proved to myself, not anyone else, that I was worth something. For the first time, I lived for me. I didn't date for a while. I didn't need to. Healing came first, but one day, I would love again. And this time, it would be real. Not manipulation, not a lie, not stolen. Real. And Ryan? He would spend the rest of his miserable life watching me from the sidelines, knowing that no matter what he did, he lost. For good.